This is a new day. This is a new day full of sound and light and expectation. This day has been waiting for you. This day has been waiting especially for you, to embrace you, to guide you. This day has been waiting with open arms. Interesting, kind of, just for you. This is the day we've been given. Let's not waste it. Come now and let us worship together. Please rise in body or spirit for our first hymn. It's going to be 1007 in the teal hymnal. There's a river flowing in my soul.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my soul.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Sinkovich, and I welcome you to this church, known as UUYO. We do not require members to follow a creed or set of beliefs about God or the nature of reality. Instead, we are bound together by an agreement to follow the spirit of love in our daily lives, to serve our community, to dwell together in peace, and to seek the truth in love. This church community has discerned the spirit of love to call us toward care for the vulnerable and marginalized, as great prophets have done in the past. We have waved a rainbow flag to signify this place as a sanctuary for any persons who identify as LGBTQIA. We have raised a Black Lives Matter banner to remind ourselves and our community that racism and systems that support racism must transform if we are to become the beloved community. If you come to us with a broken heart, welcome. If you come to us with a searching and restless heart, welcome. If you are a person in search of healing for yourself and for our world, welcome. If you feel drawn to this path, or if it describes the path you are already on, we would like to get to know you better. Please join us for coffee after service. And a few announcements. Join us in conversation with Michael Pollan and John Shartle about psychedelics. We will watch Michael Pollan's documentary, How to Change Your Mind, on Friday, March 10th at 6:30 p.m. downstairs in Channing Hall. It is free to attend. Secondly, for our spring equinox planning, Join UUYO members and friends to share Earth-centered experiences, reflections, traditions, and brunch while planning celebrations for the spring equinox celebration. This next and final planning session for that will be next Saturday, March 11th, and the discussion begins at 10 a.m. You can arrive at 9 if you want to help prepare brunch. And also printed in your order of service, please join us in 2 weeks for the Ginger Ackley Benefit Concert here at the church. We'll be following service, I believe, at 1 p.m. And now for Tim Raridan with another announcement.
Morning. Don't need my glasses this time. I need to see more clearly, just like we all do. I'm here, I'm going to give a little background. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but there's some things that I just need to say right now. I, in the late 80s, moved to Chicago, looking to do music, looking to do sound, and I wanted to get environmentally active because the global warming, is what they called it then, was heating up. There was a Nightline with Ted Koppel that I saw that I'll never forget that was about that and the ozone depletion that was happening then. And that just shocked me. I was already following environmental issues, and that shocked me. I had supported Greenpeace, a very well-known international environmental group. I gave them $10. I didn't have a whole lot at that time, and I, of course, still don't, but that's okay. And I just wanted to be a part of helping in some way, and I wanted their information. They had some of the best information that you couldn't get from the regular press for a long time. So I moved to Chicago, and I didn't even know what group I might get involved with there, but there was an ad in one of the papers there, and I got into Greenpeace, and I worked on all kinds of environmental issues, canvassing for Greenpeace, on the phone, later door-to-door in the suburbs of Chicago, which was kind of interesting sometimes, I must say. And I also painted several banners for events in streets. I went to suburbs of Chicago and fought against environmental racism, where they were citing waste dumps and incinerators near the poorest communities, mostly Black and Hispanic, mostly Black there. I work on the Great Lakes that our campaigners were focusing on because of chlorinated chemicals. They used chlorine to bleach paper and dumped the waste into the Great Lakes. And as you know from recent experience, chlorinated chemicals are some of the worst that we have. And I never thought of chlorine as a problem, but it certainly is and was then. Anyways, we had some strong bonds, our group there. And at the end of the 90s, Greenpeace kind of shrunk and got more focused on other issues. Things are always evolving in these kind of things, of course. And the guy that I worked with most is still working in the DC office and is a senior strategist still. I did a lot of mailings and so forth with him. And I've been in touch with him very much on the East Palestine issue. And I'm just eyes and boots on the ground here, giving him some information and hopefully getting some good information from him and trying to share it with some of the people from the fracking group and the church right now as well. And what I wanted to say, though, was what has been happening. We worked at Greenpeace, when I was there, one of the main issues we worked on was the WTI incinerator in East Liverpool, Ohio. Our entire office, all of our canvassers would go out, and this was for months, and that was our primary focus, was to stop that incinerator, because if we would have stopped that hazardous waste incinerator, which was at the time the largest one proposed in the country, if we could have stopped that one, then it would have stopped other ones too. We wanted to stop the industry from handling waste that way because of the inherent problems involved and the corruption involved in the people that were handling it. That wasn't successful. We failed to stop that incinerator, but we succeeded in preventing further production of other incinerators. So that was a success. And it was frustrating too. So anyways, I moved back here and I got burned out. I know, I'm sorry. I'm not doing this to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about East Palestine. And not just that, but that it's a symptom of a deeper disease that goes on. And that disease is a capitalism that has no heart, a capitalism that has no checks, no balances, and continues to spin out of control and is controlled only by those who have political power and money and continue to do things in ways that hurt the very people that give them that money as customers and so forth. And so I would hope that we can refocus not just on the disease that is East Palestine, and it's a bad disease, but the real disease behind that. That's a symptom, I'm sorry. The symptom is East Palestine and train wrecks. There was another train wreck, by the way, yesterday up around Toledo, and another announcement I wanted to make, and I found out this after I talked with Joseph about saying something this morning. The rains now have forced open one of the dams down in East Palestine that was holding back toxic water, and so the water is spilling out again, even after they tried to protect it. So I'll say more of this at other times, I hope, but I hope that we can refocus ourselves as a people, as a church, as a community, and come together with some of the people that may disagree with us on this. The people of East Palestine are 70% Trump supporters, and we're on the same side on this in many ways. The government, the EPA, the train companies, the voters that put people in, including Democrats, all of us are to blame for this. All of us. I've worked for Greenpeace. I don't feel like I've done enough to stop this. So think about what you can do, okay? In whatever way. Send food to East Palestine. Paint a sign. Communicate with somebody that you care about that's from the area. Thank you. I'm sorry to take so much.
Thank you for your call to action, Tim. At this time, I would like to invite Min for the chalice lighting.
Good morning. My name is Min Raley, and when I agreed to do the chalice lighting on vulnerability, I thought, no big deal. I'm used to being up here. And then I struggled, and I struggled, and I struggled. And I finally got something down in my tablet, which you'll notice I don't have today. So this morning, I got into an argument with my husband and my daughter, and I walked out of the house alone with no tablet and no chalice lighting. What could make you more vulnerable? I'm up here doing improv. So basically, Being vulnerable is something that in our culture we're taught to try to avoid. You know, I grew up with a dad who was a farmer, a biker, an ex-military, and he raised me like a boy. So what that means is I was told, never show vulnerability. Don't cry, don't let people know they hurt you, you know, be strong all the time. I was raised with a mom who's very different. My parents are very different. And so my life was a constant balancing act between trying to be close to people without being vulnerable. And somewhere along the line, I realized that if I'm not vulnerable, if I'm not open enough to let someone really get to know me, which is what vulnerability is, then even if they say they love me, they don't really, because they don't know me. They don't know who I am. If I'm not vulnerable enough to share who I really am, then they probably won't be able to hurt me, probably, but they also won't really be able to love me. I say that as I stand here being still mad at my husband and daughter for being jerk faces. The fact that I love them so much and they love me so much, and we can argue and then go home and probably have a really nice lunch and make up, is because we're vulnerable to each other. And you can be vulnerable in a lot of ways. Right now, obviously, our area is very vulnerable. Some of you know, some of you don't. I live in Rogers, which is 5.1 miles away from where that train wreck was. So for 2 weeks after, we could barely breathe outside of our own house. The water, the creek that runs through East Palestine, that's full of chemicals, runs past my house. We have well water. We are all feeling very vulnerable right now. I have animals outside. My parents both have breathing issues. We all have asthma. So physically, we're feeling vulnerable. Financially, we're feeling vulnerable because what happens if our well water is not safe to drink? What happens if we can't grow the garden that we use to live food? And I say that knowing how blessed I am because I have friends and family who can't go back to their own houses. My cousin's children haven't slept in their own bed for a month. They are living in a hotel. And I don't know about you, but when I stay in a hotel, I feel pretty vulnerable. That's not my bed. I don't know how clean those sheets are. Who cleaned the bathroom last time? What's that weird stain on the wall? Yeah, no. So, I'm sorry that my chalice lighting wasn't as eloquent as I would have liked it to be, but I think it's really fitting that I am feeling as vulnerable today as I am. And I think it's really nice, as I told Reverend Joseph before, that we all belong in a place where I feel like I can be vulnerable with you and I'm safe. And that's what I felt the first day that I walked in here, and I still feel it every day I come here, that I'm safe here and I am loved, and I know that I'm not alone. So we light this chalice in honor of all of that. And I'm still not tall enough.
Today, in the service, they will be talking about vulnerability. You guys have heard that word a lot this morning, right? But do you know what it means? So the dictionary says that vulnerability is the quality or state of being related to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. Now, you all listen closely to this story and be ready to answer some questions when it is finished. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the poor little mouse. "Please let me go, and someday I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a very small mouse could ever help him, but he was generous and finally let the mouse go, and she quickly ran away. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in a net from a hunter. Unable to free himself, he filled the forest with this angry roar. Roar, roar, roar. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed it until it parted. That means she chewed it, okay? Until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion." So, who was vulnerable in this story? Both? Okay, what made them vulnerable? Size? Okay. Size for the mouse. What about the lion? How was he vulnerable? He was trapped, right? Right? So everyone can be vulnerable. And can you be strong and be vulnerable at the same time? Yeah? Yeah. Who was strong and vulnerable at the same time? Yeah. Yeah. The mouse. What about the lion? Was he strong and vulnerable at the same time? Yeah. So in our class today, we're going to be talking about that too. We're going to be dissecting it through what we call brain fogging, because that's what I do. I don't do a brainstorm, I do a brain fog. That means we think about the issues slowly, and we kind of meditate on those issues to figure them out. And so we'll give you some reports later on in the month, because we're going to be talking about this all month long. Thank you very much. It's time for the kids to go to class. Oh, hey, wait, let's go this way, Nora. Let's go this way. We're going to stop over here and pick up Amari, okay? We're going to go this way. Okay, come on. Go this way.
Your order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Our church is completely supported by pledge income from members and friends like you. If you wish to make an offering to us, please designate on your check or envelope it is for UUYO. Our Give Away the Plate recipient for March is Operation Pollination. Operation Pollination is an environmental initiative that formed to champion and support the biological phenomenon we know as the monarch butterfly. Operation Pollination's purpose is to restore a vibrant pollinator corridor from Mexico to Canada to benefit all wildlife. Together, we can change the landscaping paradigm away from the ecological wastelands that dominate our yards and corporate landscapes. With education, we can recreate our outdoor spaces to be the vibrant, healthy spaces that nature intended. Your generous contributions will help Operation Pollination partners continue to plant the seeds of change throughout our communities. We will now receive the offering that supports the life of Youngstown, the Mahoning Valley, and our wider world.
it saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear. The hour I first believed.
Please join me in a time of meditation. We'll continue to hold the burgers. I heard last night Louisa took a face plant, broke her nose, and is now waiting 16 hours for surgery at the ER. She's in good spirits. Her daughter is doing better, so I think that's part of it. But let's hold the burgers in silence for a little bit. Oh, Louisa's home now. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen.
Our reading today comes from the Irish poet David Whyte. This comes from actually a collection of essays entitled Consolations, the Solace, Nourishment, and Underlying Meaning of Everyday Words, and aptly titled for today's service, Vulnerability. Vulnerability is not a weakness. a passing indisposition, or something we can arrange to do without. Vulnerability is not a choice. Vulnerability is the underlying, ever-present, and abiding undercurrent of our natural state. To run from vulnerability is to run from the essence of our nature. The attempt to be invulnerable is the vain attempt to become something we are not, and most especially, to close off our understanding of the grief of others. More seriously, in refusing our vulnerability, we refuse the help needed at every turn of our existence and immobilize the essential tidal and conversational foundations of our identity. To have a temporary, isolated sense of power over all events and circumstances is a lovely, illusionary privilege, and perhaps the prime and most beautifully constructed conceit of being human, and especially of being youthfully human. But it is a privilege that must be surrendered with that same youth, with ill health, with accident, with the loss of loved ones who do not share our untouchable powers, powers eventually and most emphatically given up as we approach our last breath. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance. Our choice is to inhabit vulnerability as generous citizens of loss, robustly and fully, or conversely, as misers and complainers, reluctant and fearful, always at the gates of existence, but never bravely and completely attempting to enter, never wanting to risk ourselves, never walking fully through the door.
I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a valley and now find myself back in a valley with a mighty river running alongside it. I grew up near the Willamette River, which had a reputation, like many rivers that run along industrial cities, of being so polluted that we used to dare each other to swim in it. We were pretty sure that they would grow gills or become a superhero. We weren't sure which, and we took bets. And yet you would always see someone fishing out of that river. One of the few food sources I'm sure they could find. It really wasn't a popular valley, even though it was the state's capital. They had, when I was younger, wine vineyards that were not known beyond the state. And while I was waiting on Belmont to get my car worked on, I saw a Wine Spectator magazine and a list of some of the best wineries in the world. And you know what I saw? A winery 20 miles away from where I grew up. A place that was largely invisible 30 years ago. One of the people I knew, who was a friend of the family, owned a vineyard. It was very small. It was a small operation, but it was still a business. My parents believed in following Jesus' example, so they drank wine with friends whenever they could. His name was Tony, and he taught me a couple lessons in vulnerability. He was in his late 60s when I met him, and he paid me quite handsomely, actually, as a teenager, to help him move supplies and keep the land clean, mow his lawn, stuff like that. He was big, boisterous, but still in his 60s, and he needed a walking stick. One day, he was sitting in the back of a tractor and said to me simply, "Hop in, you're going to drive." Never driven anything in my life. He said, "Just go straight." So, I did what a lot of newbie drivers do when they've never driven anything in their life, and I stepped fully on the gas. And the front of the tractor went up, and we did kind of a wheelie for a while. And oh my gosh, I was freaked out. And I looked back, Tony was gone. I looked down behind the tractor, and he was on the ground laughing. He said, with his eyes closed, almost to himself, "I thought I was going to die." And then he looked at me while still on the ground, and he said, "I thought my life would flash before my eyes, but no, I saw your life." And he said, "Press the gas gently." And I learned something that day. When you subtract or add just a little pressure, it can make all the difference in the world between danger and safety. I also felt something which I had never felt before as a kid, never with an adult. I felt he trusted me, though I couldn't see why he should trust me. Especially after throwing him off a tractor, he continued to trust me. And I didn't see this until later. I can see I was learning to trust myself. I met his granddaughter, who was about my age, and she said to me when we first met, "My grandfather says you can be counted on." I almost asked, did he mention I almost killed him? But I resisted. I think a big part of having vulnerability is simply trust. When we trust, we become vulnerable. When we truly trust, it means we really don't know how any interaction will go. And sometimes we don't have much evidence other than just some gut instinct. It's a wonderful feeling when someone trusts you. I would try little sips of wine out of the vineyard. And I didn't think about it then, but I think about it now. How different elements have to be open to each other to create any experience. The soil and human commitment have to work together. The vines are open to the seasons, including wild variations, lots of rain one year, wildfires, which happened the next year, the happy accident of location, of being a certain distance from the ocean, having someone who is watchful and attentive to what is happening. There is no life, no act of creation without a pretty radical degree of openness. I think another word for vulnerability is interconnected. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I don't really like that word. When I think of the word interconnected, it sounds very technical to me. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking about two pieces of technology I'm trying to connect. It feels a little orchestrated. But I think the true meaning of interconnectedness is realizing our vulnerability. Realizing that whether we feel it or not, this moment is only here because all of us are vulnerable. All of us are open to the effect of sunlight, water, food, and friendship. Did you like how I threw friendship in there? We all exist on sunlight, water, food, and friendship. My definition of friendship is changing over the years. Perhaps it's growing more expansive. I used to think friendship was about being best buds, or the few people in your life you really could get along with, that you had things in common with. But maybe it's just living in different places. I now experience friendship that can happen on all different levels. Simply being open to another person is an act of friendship, even if it's just for a moment. Just taking the time to listen to another human being with a modicum of appreciation. I think that's what makes the world goes around. I might be overstating that a little, but not by much. So many people feel so lonely. Maybe you feel lonely. We all feel lonely. Together. It's our great paradox, and maybe our greatest joke. We feel lonely. Together. Unaware of how vulnerable we really are to each other. For this sermon, when I say vulnerability, I'm not talking about a state of being or a choice that pushes us past our comfort zone. I'm not talking about opening ourselves more than we usually are. I'm not talking about putting more trust in other people than we usually do. Maybe that'll be another Sunday. But today, I think it's enough to see how with our normal cultivated defenses, which are quite powerful, we are vulnerable enough for life to be possible. And that, in and of itself, is a small miracle. Even and especially if we feel lonely, and there is a deficit of inspiration for us, or a feeling that we lack a community, we are open to life. It's enough. I don't think we have to create ourselves into special conditions to recognize our vulnerability. We can simply do that now, as we are. Whether we're feeling cut off, too vulnerable, or somewhere in between, each of us, I think, has the experience of feeling frozen, like an iceberg. We feel solid, floating along in a world that starts to feel like scenery. The world can feel like it's changing, and we're still the same. Or the inverse, we're changing, and everyone and everything seems to stay the same. And there's a sense of separation. There's us and the world. There's us, me, and you. I think all of us have that experience. And there's nothing wrong with that. When felt more extreme, it can feel isolating. And I think most of us have had that, or are still living with that feeling. I remember when I first lived alone, I lived on the second floor apartment downtown in a busy street, and I would see people walking on the street. And I had this very visceral experience of myself inside, myself looking out onto a world with other people walking. I think it's a common feeling. I feel showing up here on a Sunday morning, no matter how we're feeling or what mood we're in, is an act of vulnerability. For many, actually, it's a very brave act. We really don't know what other people's lives are like. Not really. Not in the private contours of our heart. We don't always know what someone is wrestling with or what might be on their mind. I think some distraction is good. So I don't mind hearing children play or hearing sounds of heaters. This sanctuary is actually built for distraction. Have you noticed that? The acoustics are such that you can hear the subtlest sounds. So when someone gets up out of their seat, or we hear a baby cry, we're actually meant to hear it. Did you know that? We want to hear it. We want to hear laughter. Honestly, even a good snore is kind of funny. The windows are very, very large. And the western side of the sanctuary, I don't know if you notice, it gets really good light. Sometimes it gets very intense. And some say on a warm day, if they sit in some of these rows, it's like they're baking. And some say, oh, it's lovely. And some will say, I'm going to go to the shade. It's lovely, actually, when I look out and I see some of your faces looking really pensive. And then you get distracted by something outside or some noise downstairs in the kitchen. Distraction is a sign of vulnerability. We are open, even if we don't recognize it. One of the greatest signs of vulnerability, I got one here, our phones. We are nonstop open to the world, moving faster than the speed of sound. I've said it before, and I'm glad to say it again. My favorite part of service is coffee hour. The sermon can be okay, but coffee, that's something else. The service, in my opinion, just gives us enough courage, hopefully, and enough inspiration to have coffee with each other. That's the whole point. One of the jokes is that coffee is our communion, right? It's actually not a joke to me. I see it that way. We don't need any other special ritual or experience. Two people sitting or standing, having coffee, is the beginning and end of religious exploration. Do you think I exaggerate? Yeah, good point. You can have tea. We have decaf or another beverage downstairs. But the point is being together. It's simple and ordinary. A lot of the time I wonder if we think we need to do something really out there in order to be vulnerable. You know, put ourselves in a shark cage or give a public talk in front of people or something, I don't know. Maybe we do and maybe we don't. When I was in Tulsa, I was one of the chaperones for graduating seniors that wanted to go out to rural Arkansas and go rock climbing. Like on actual rocks, towering way above the earth. I thought it was a crazy idea, and I said so. But I was an intern, so no one cared. And all the seniors got their permission slips signed, and a couple of the seniors wanted to go because their friends were going, but they really didn't want to rock climb. So I was asked to come along to keep company with those who were really afraid. They thought, and they said so, they thought I could convince them to conquer their fear. And, you know, say something like on a sweatshirt, like, just do it. I told them I'm not going to be that much of a motivator, to be honest. One of the teenagers was so frightened and felt this pressure from his friends. You know, all his friends who said, oh, I'm scared, but I do it anyway. Something like that. And he just said to me privately, I'm just scared. So we sat and looked overlooking the fields. It was high up, and people looked really tiny. I'm not afraid of heights, but I don't go out of my way to just go up really, really high, you know, for no reason. But I remember in the worship service, this teenager gave a homily, and he said, I went up afraid, and I came down afraid. But now I'm okay with that. For me, that's vulnerability. It's not pushing ourselves necessarily, unless we feel that push within ourselves. It's recognizing where we are and coming to believe that we're still not cut off. None of us is cut off from the stream of life. The river that flows on, it flows, whether we feel it or not. It's there, and it carries us along. It's the undercurrent of our natural state, as David White says so beautifully. And guess what? We can be afraid. We can feel cut off. We can feel different and awkward. We can feel vulnerable. We can forget our tablet and still show up. All these experiences are forms of vulnerability. It's the undercurrent of our life. And here on a Sunday morning, on this beautiful sunny day, we get to witness the tip of the iceberg. An iceberg that's also part of the river. And then I have this image of icebergs drinking coffee. And the metaphor kind of breaks down a little bit. I don't know. Maybe polar bears drinking coffee. Yeah. Hot chocolate, yeah. We don't need to be completely open in the way that we might imagine to experience vulnerability. It's already here. And if you doubt that for a second, join us for coffee. It's mostly pleasant, I have to say. At times a tad awkward, but mostly lovely. That's vulnerable enough for today. And over time, you will meet people here who you might feel you want to share your life with. And it will not feel forced or performative. It will be natural. The river might take you there. But even that's not the end goal. The end goal is to appreciate what we already have today, the day we've been given. Enough vulnerability to appreciate our condition and perhaps appreciate someone else's condition. The tip of the iceberg. It's enough for today. Please pray with me. Spirit of love, so grateful for this wonderful community. So grateful for those who come early and bring cookies. Sometimes it's homemade. It's pretty amazing. Those who make coffee and set up a space where hospitality is possible. I'm so grateful for every person who showed up today, every person who left their house, every person on Zoom who is all over this city and this country and world. So grateful that each and every one of them was born. Please help us to feel that we are enough today. Please help us to be open enough to someone else to at least say hello. All this we pray. Amen. Please rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, which is in the teal hymnal, 1046, Shall We Gather at the River?
Shall we gather at the river where bright angel feet have trod, with its crystal tide forever flowing by the throne of God? Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. On the margin of the river, washing up its silver spray, we will walk and worship ever all the happy golden day. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. There we reach the shining river, lay we every burden down. Grace our spirits will deliver and provide a robe and a crown. Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with by the throne of God.
We extinguish the flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts until we meet again.
As you depart, please remember the one great fact. You are loved and never truly alone.